So we're just going to start with you kind of introducing yourself, and then we'll kind of go from there. You can go ahead.
Hey, I'm Brian Lauer, and I help with the Creation Science Club here at St. Cloud State. And our goal is to give people an opportunity to think, because you need to see both sides of an issue if you want to think, and a lot of times that doesn't happen in class.
Mm-hmm. So kind of what do you guys majority do to achieve that goal?
Well, we've done a lot of talks here on campus. We've shown movies here on campus. We'd love to have a debate on campus if we can find an evolutionist to step up into the microphone. And, you know, last year they wanted to do a roundtable discussion or a panel discussion. Have a creationist, an evolutionist, a Christian, an atheist, a Hindu, a Muslim, and just have them up there and people can ask them questions.
Okay. So what kind of would your ideal kind of debate look like with all of those people, and kind of what would you like to do?
I won't call it a debate. I would just call it where people can come and ask questions. And I think it would be good to give each person like 5 or 10 minutes where they can ask anybody else on the panel questions. Because we know where everybody's weak. You know, on a debate, the moderator kind of steers the debate by the questions he asks. Mm-hmm. And if you and I debated a science teacher on standing for truth. And there you had like 15 minutes to talk to, you know, ask him any question you wanted. And then he had 15 minutes to ask me any question he wanted. And I like that, you know, because that takes the moderator out of it.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So kind of what did it look like last year compared to this year of what you guys have done so far?
This year was really slow. Last year we met once a week and we showed creation clips and talked about them. And this year when Charlie Kirk got assassinated, the president said he was concerned. He was fearful, so he said, take my name off everything. And so he didn't want, and so that, and I understand, you know, and so it's been almost dormant right now, but hopefully this 30 minutes will get people interested in seeing another perspective.
Yeah. Kind of how long has the club been going here at SCSU? Let's
see, around 2015 we got a club here and started doing talks. I've got flyers too if you want to see any of that stuff. Yeah, and then just with the Creation Science Club, that's been about 3 years or so. But we've been on campus, you know, with different talks and presentations.
Okay, so if you had to like just define what creation science means, what would you define it as?
Well, I would say that there's two worldviews. One is based on blind chance, that's the Big Bang and evolution, and then the other one's based on a designer, a creation. And, you know, the studio didn't get put together by chance. That'd be pretty absurd. Mm-hmm. How much more absurd to think our bodies get put together by chance. But yet, students aren't allowed to think that in class. And so if they only see one side, they don't think. They just memorize. And I think that we should help them think critically. If there's two theories out there, let them think about it and come to their own conclusion. Instead of saying, this is dogma, this is what you have to believe, and if you don't believe it, you're not going to get your scholarship, or you might get fired, or you won't get tenure, because that's happening.
Okay. And so do you have a lot of students involved in the club right now?
Well, COVID kind of blew it out of the water. You know, we're kind of getting back on our feet, and then the assassination kind of slowed things down. And yeah, we just there's room for growth. We'll put it that way.
So how many students do you have?
Well, we had, let's see, last year there'd be about 5 or 6 that would show up, and then you can invite people. You know, I thought once a month or once a week might be a little bit too much for people, but you just let them run the way they want. And I thought maybe once every month or two have a presentation and have a big event, and then a debate at the end. You know, but classes get busy, and you know, there's not as many students as there used to be, and so we just do with what we have, make do with what we have.
So you guys meet once a month?
Ideally, yeah. Right. With our president, he's you know, he's still gun shy, and so, you know, to get a room, you need a student's name on it. So actually this Thursday we're going to do a dinosaur talk at the St. Cloud Public Library.
Okay.
That's going to start at 6 p.m. and then we're going to explain another perspective of dinosaurs.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So can you kind of give a little teaser about what that presentation will kind of look like?
Well, there's a lot of confusion about that. I was talking to a woman at the community college, and she said that her her niece was going through confirmation, and she asked the priest about dinosaurs, and she got a bad answer. So she concluded either Adam and Eve are false or dinosaurs are false. And I looked at her and I said, Adam and Eve are true, and dinosaurs are true. The thing that's false is millions of years. That's based on blind chance assumptions that can't be validated. And so, and just recently, I talked to my sister-in-law over Christmas, and she got kicked out of youth group because she asked about dinosaurs. You know, and I even asked at the Christian club here on campus. They had a table up there, and I asked them, you know, what would you tell somebody if they asked about dinosaurs and they didn't know what to say? So they pointed at their leader, and there's about 8 of them, and the leader said, Leviathan? That's from Job 41. But I said there's more than that. So a biblical perspective of dinosaurs were they're land animals. They were created on day 6 with all the other land animals. And then 2 of every kind of dinosaur got on the ark, Noah's ark. They were young, so they could still get in the door. And then all the rest of the dinosaurs and people, they died outside the ark. And a lot of them got buried in mud and turned into fossils. And then the dinosaurs got off the ark, and people called them dragons. And when I said dragons to my sister-in-law, the light bulbs just went on. And so then people called them dragons and killed them, and they also carved them into castles and canyons and temples. So people did see dinosaurs. There's legends of dinosaurs, legends of dragons all over the world. And it bothered Carl Sagan so much that he wrote a book. It's like, how can people separated by time and distance describe the same animal? And so it bothered him so much, and you can still get it on Amazon. It's called Dragons of Eden. And his premise, to explain how everybody could know about dinosaurs, his premise was that the memories were passed on in our DNA, and that's been debunked. And so there's 2 perspectives of dinosaurs. You get one that's taught as dogma, and the other one people are going to have to dig for. And so we want to make it easy for people to find.
Okay, so that's kind of what you guys are going to talk about at the presentation.
Yeah, and we'll do clips of Mary Schweitzer. She found blood cells in dinosaur bones. And blood cells can't last millions of years. And she took a lot of heat saying can't be, that must be something else. But she proved that they were blood cells. And so we'll show a clip of her saying that all the science and all the breakdown experiments show that they shouldn't be there, but they are. So nobody would expect to see that. And then Bob Enyart, he called up Mary's boss, Jack Horner, and he said, hey, I'll give you $20,000 if you carbon date that bone. And because carbon-14 shouldn't be in anything over 50 to 100,000 years. And Jack Horner, he said, he hemmed and hawed, and he was really squirming. And finally he said, that's not going to help. And he won't take the money. Because when you find C14 in dinosaurs, which I was just, there was a geophysics conference in 2012 in Singapore. And these guys, they had 8 to 10 dinosaur specimens from China and from Montana. And they radiocarbon dated them, and they got 22,000 to 39,000 years old. And they submitted it. It was, and they censored it. It's not on their website anymore. So instead of letting evidence go out there that shows that dinosaurs are young, they censor it. And that's what really bothers me. I think science should go wherever the evidence leads to, and we shouldn't just pick one and teach it as dogma.
Yeah. So kind of what is your favorite part about the Science Creation Club as long as you've been involved?
Oh, well, I remember the first talk I gave here, it was called Who's Your Daddy? And a big picture of a monkey, and the guy who was helping me with this, he had a heart for the atheists. So the atheists were there, and my pastor was there, and there's a lot of people there, and I was scared to death. And when I got done, and I go through all this science, and the first question was, well, the Bible's just, they started attacking the Bible. They didn't attack the science. And when I was done, there was a guy named, I forget his name, but he said, thank you for doing this. I was beginning to doubt the Bible because of what he was being taught in his class. And that's when a lot of people lose their faith. Ken Ham, he wrote this book, Already Gone, where 60-some% of the church kids stop going to church when they leave home. In some denominations, it's 90%. And they surveyed them and said, why is that? And they said, they doubted the Bible. And so they asked, well, when did you begin to doubt? And more often than not, it was junior high and high school. And that's when they're getting the Big Bang and evolution rammed down their throat. And I went through our 2024 textbooks here in St. Cloud, high school textbooks. I found a whole myriad of errors, just scientifically false things that they were teaching based on science journals. And I went to the school board meeting 6 times. I went to one, and I emailed the curriculum director, and I gave her about eight errors, and she said, well, we're just teaching the state standards. And so then I asked, well, what standard says we're 1.6% different from chimpanzees? And she didn't respond, but the superintendent did, and said they've contacted their law firm in their response. It's like, why don't you contact the publisher? and ask them why you're putting false information, or at least see why that's in there. And one of the things was they said that it's in there that the Earth's oldest rock was found near Hudson Bay in 2008. Well, in 2019, NASA said that they found the Earth's oldest rock on the moon. And it says clearly one of them's false. And so then I had a booth at I had a booth at the fair explaining this, and somebody walked by and said, "Hey, I was on the curriculum committee. This is the best we could find." And I said, "Yeah, and it can get better once you get the errors out of it." And so we talked, and I asked her, "You can show these errors?" And she said, "No, I could get fired." So a teacher is afraid of getting fired for pointing out errors in our textbooks. And so that's pretty alarming to me. And so I finally did contact the publishers. They've just ghosted me. But what did happen is NASA took that website down, that story, the Earth's oldest rock found on the moon. They took that page down. And so when I I got the link for what I used to go to, and it doesn't go to that. And but there are other science journals where you can find that same information. So what I'm concerned is they do whatever they can to push a blind chance perspective. And I think it's because if creation ever gets a foot in the door, then people can see, this thing had to be created. You know what? Our bodies need to be created. And then it goes to, well, who's the creator? And I think that's what they really want to oppose. And so I'm just trying to give, basically, again, people an opportunity to think. And I didn't get to think. I didn't get that opportunity until I was almost 40. And a cousin of mine sent me this video by Dr. Kent Hovind called The Age of the Earth. And that was the first time in my life that I ever heard anybody say, you know what, fossils are a sign of a flood. And evolution's based on lies. And he went through and he documented them all. And that was when my education began. Because that was when I could see both sides and I could compare and contrast and I could think critically. And then when I looked at all the evidence and what's been censored, it's like, yeah, creation wins hands down. And so we got the winning hand, but nobody wants to play the game. They do the censorship. I think, I think there's a battle going on in our classrooms and our courtrooms, not in the science. The science department, it's creation. Unless you start doubting evolution, then just go into dissentfromdarwin.org, and you'll see over 1,200 PhD scientists who doubt evolution. And they're from all over Harvard, all areas of biochemistry, all physics, astronomy, and they all doubt Darwinian evolution. And so I talked to Senator Putnam after one of his town hall meetings, and we're talking about this, and I said, can that fact that over 1,400 PhDs doubt evolution, can you teach that fact when the kids are taught evolution? And I emailed them that, and I never heard a response. And then there's, also the origin of life. We're seeing the evolution fall apart, the Big Bang fall apart. We're seeing plate tectonics fall apart, and also origin of life. It's all falling apart in our lifetime. And they just have to keep on imagining more and more rescuing devices to prop up millions of years. And when I show them the rescuing devices, it's pretty embarrassing, really.
Can you tell me more about what you mean, like when you say falling apart? Like just the theory? Like, what do you mean by that?
Well, the origin of life. We're farther away from getting the origin of life than when Miller and Urey did their experiment in the 50s. But because we know so much more about what's in the cell. Because when Darwin came up with his theory, they were teaching spontaneous generation until Louis Pasteur proved that was wrong. But the science was, if you want to make life, just put some meat on the table. It'll make maggots. You just put some grain and underwear in the corner. It'll make mice. That's how they just thought life popped into existence, and it doesn't. Louis Pasteur falsified that. So now they have abiogenesis. It happened once, okay? But now we know how complex the cell is. And there used to be $1 million on the table if you could prove how life came from non-life. And it was on the table 13 years, nobody could do it, so they took it down. Now it's $10 million. Show how DNA organized itself naturally. $10 million, that's EVO2, number 2, EVO2.org, I think it is. So if anybody wants a scholarship, figure that one out. Because I think that the information in the DNA, information science, says information always comes from a mind. Like a book, that what's in this paper and the ink, knowing the chemistry of it doesn't give you the message. The message comes from a mind. And that's what's happening with our DNA. There's the message in there that shows how to build everything. It's incredibly complex. It's got a message going forwards and backwards and diagonally and over time. It's incredibly complex, and man can't write that. So there had to be a supreme intelligence that put that together. And then it replicates. And it's just mind-bogglingly complex. And then with the Big Bang, that's falling apart. There's going to cosmologystatement.org. And this is from probably 20 years ago, but there's all these physicists and astronomers and cosmologists, and they're saying, the Big Bang would fall apart if you didn't add dark matter and dark energy and string theory and inflation, all these unobservable things. They said it would fall apart. And then it ends in the article saying that, the Big Bangers run the funding. So the only thing that gets funded is stuff that'll support the Big Bang. And that's what's happening with evolution, too. And sadly, it's even happening in Christian circles. Because there's a theory out there called the hydroplate theory, which makes accurate predictions. And we had our very first conference of it on 2 years ago. And we put these flyers up. This theory answers all these questions. And they stole our posters. Now, I invited the science department. I invited President Wacker. We're having this conference. You can join it online. And they stole our posters. So we put it up. And they stole it again. And it's right by the camera. And they know who did it, but they won't tell us if it was a student, faculty, or staff, and they won't make them pay for it. And so that bothered me so much. It's like, okay, we're going to do it instead of online. We're going to do it right here on campus. We did it in Atwood. And I've shown this to all the students I can find, and they all say, that's not offensive. You know what I think? It's somebody's offended because of this picture. These are dinosaur nerves on the cover of Microscopy today, and those can't last millions of years. And they don't want people thinking like that. And so then instead of arguing, like scientists should, they censor it. And that's what bothers me. If I'm paying taxes to have this place educate people, they should educate them. And that requires seeing both sides. If they only see one side, that's indoctrination. And it's, one of the things, and I did a survey after Charlie Kirk was shot. Would you like to have a free speech kiosk on campus? And it was 130 to 20, yes. So I brought it into President Dietz. I showed him the data. This is what your students want. I wanted to talk to him, but they wanted me to talk to an assistant. But the assistant knows who stole our posters and don't do anything about it. I want to talk to the president. And so hopefully I'll be able to talk to the current president. And so, yeah, and maybe this radio station could help get information out there. You could have a program once a month or week, call it freedom to think, or freedom of thought, or diversity of thought. Because in the science class, there's no diversity. And it's really hindering science. Because, who was it? Matthew Murray. He saw in the Bible that there were paths in the sea, Psalms 8:8. And so he thought, well, if God says there's paths in the sea, I'm going to find them. And he found them. It's the ocean currents. Saves the shipping industry billions of dollars because he saw it was in the Bible. And he didn't get fired for it. And that's the other thing that we got. We've got volumes of, the censorship. The censorship is what really needs to happen. Jerry Bergman, he did this book already. This is his third volume of people who are getting fired, or they lose their grant money, or they don't get scholarships because they either doubt evolution or they believe in creation. Dr. Gonzalez, he wasn't a creationist. He was at Iowa State, and he had 68 peer-reviewed papers published. And at Iowa State, you only need 16 to get tenure. And then he wrote this book called Privileged Planet, where he said, you know what? And he just came in as a scientist, all these perfect things for life to be here. And then he also realized, you know what, we're the perfect. He said his conclusion was the perfect place for life is also the perfect place to make discoveries. And he had made this, and you can see the movie. We showed it here on campus, Privileged Planet. It's a book also. And from the Big Bang perspective, it's all random. Nobody's special. And so the professors and the atheists and got this big petition saying we don't want him here. And so Iowa State did not give Dr. Gonzalez tenure. Even though he was far and away qualified, they wouldn't tolerate a difference of thought. They've got a dogma, and they're going to make sure people believe that dogma. And if you go counter to that dogma, you're not getting tenure. And that's not what higher education is. That's higher indoctrination.
Okay. I'm sorry, I want to shift the conversation back to something that you said a little bit ago.
Sure.
Can you tell me more about the free speech kiosk that you want to get here on campus and what that would look like?
Oh, yeah. It would be, I'd love one in every building. I'd love one in the science building. I think if the kiosks are open, anybody can use them. Because right now, you got free speech zones outside. And nobody's going to stop when it's 10 below or 20 below or it's raining. And I think taxpayers should have a voice, since they're funding this, when it is bad weather. And so, Atwood, because at the science building, this is several years ago, I went in and because my brother-in-law he had a geology class here, and they spent a week trying to figure out how Grand Canyon got here, and all of them, none of the ideas work. Okay, and then on Friday the professor said, we looked at all these theories that don't work, but we haven't looked at one. Anybody know what it is? Kid raised his hand and said Noah's flood, and it got real quiet in the room, and the professor said, yeah, you're right, but we can't talk about it. So I know they don't have a theory for Grand Canyon. And several years ago, I gave the 8th edition of this In the Beginning book by Dr. Walt Brown, and it's got the Grand Canyon, and it shows all the different theories, and his hydroplate theory explains everything. And I said, do you want to see a theory that works for Grand Canyon? And she said, yeah. And so I gave her the book. She had it about 6 months, and we got together and talked for about an hour and a half. And she said, if the assumption is true, the science works. But she didn't believe the assumption was true. And so then just recently, a year or two ago, I gave it to another professor, and within a day or two, she said, Walt Brown's not a geologist. You can come and get your book. And she said, we have it all figured out for the Grand Canyon. And I said, well, then you should tell the park system, because they got three theories that don't work. And I've submitted the hydroplate theory for it, and it's going to come. It's going to come. And that's why I got this shirt. It says, NASA scientists work for Walt Brown. This is Walt Brown. And his premise was the water during Noah's flood, and we'll skip the physics and the mechanics of it, but shot up with such tremendous force that some of it went into space. And some of it turned into comets and asteroids. So he said, you're going to find stuff from the comets, or from Earth in those comets. You're going to find stuff formed in extreme heat, in water, in comets. And he was right. The Stardust mission, and then Pastor Kevin Lee, he predicted what would happen on the DART mission. So the hydroplate theory, it's made 59 predictions. And that's what everybody should start asking. When you're being taught something in class, say, hey, what predictions has this theory made? What predictions have been accurate? What are the current predictions? So then you can keep score if it's a good theory or not. Because Walt Brown, he says, if you don't make predictions, you don't have confidence. And it's weak science. And so we're starting the hydroplate protocol. It's like, these are the predictions. And we interviewed a whole bunch of people on hydroplate theory on YouTube. The Hydroplate Week of Celebration, a whole week we interviewed people, different areas of life, and why it's being censored. And it's very powerful, and they always typically point to the predictions, the accurate predictions that he predicted before it happened. And then the current upcoming one that they're going to have, there's about 10 of them that they say are confirmed. And it was Bill Wells, he's a fighter pilot, and he says, yeah, I can see it all. I could see, from 30,000 feet. He's a pilot for Delta now. And he can see the funnel. He can just see all that. He can see the floodplain from the Grand Canyon when he flies into San Diego. And oh yeah, that was Bill Wells. Fred McNabb, he went through all the predictions, and he thinks that he's validated 20 of them. And the plate tectonics people are always wrong. The evolution is always wrong. It's like, this is the theory that works, and we need to get it into the mainstream. And it's not happening in class. I was here, I heard President Wacker speak one time. Yeah. So I don't know how I got there, but I was there, and she was talking about how the enrollment, this is before COVID, she was talking about how the enrollment, and she had a graph, was just a 45-degree decline. She said, we're losing students. And she talked about her theories why and whatever. And then they had a meet and greet over in Atwood, and so I went over there and waited until everybody was gone. I left her alone, and I said, you might be able to attract and retain more students if you allowed a diversity of thought in class. And she said, colleges, I said, like creation and intelligent design. And she said, well, college is where those ideas used to be debated. So I didn't know if she was for it or not. So I took the science journals into the science departments, and they had nothing to do with it. I tried to get the library to carry them, nothing. I went to the anthropology. That was the shortest meeting ever. They don't want anything to do with having another perspective. And it's doing a disservice for our students. It's not teaching them to think critically. And we need critical thinkers. We just can't follow the crowd anymore.
So that's kind of your goal with the Science Creation Club?
Yes. Get people to think.
So, I guess my question is, I completely lost it. I'm so sorry.
No,
but where do you kind of see the club kind of going within the next few years, especially as less and less students are coming to campus.
Well, we can do more and more online. Like the Thursday night, that's going to be live streamed. I learned how to StreamYard, for the week of celebrations. I learned how to StreamYard and do this and this and this. And so we're going to live stream it from the library. And and I see it could be more. And even now, with the internet, we're putting together a flood geology conference. And it's going to be in the summer, and it's going to be scientists and all that stuff. And it's, I'm emailing that's another whole long story. But yeah, a lot of it can be done real easy, and I could see this getting more of an online presence, and even a lot of the college talks that we gave here, you can see online, and it's and I see ideally what we would see is people who want not only to think critically, they want to help other people think critically. And then you get a president, the vice president, all that stuff. You get the advisor and then I always tell the the president, your main job is find somebody to step into your shoes. We want this club to keep rolling. And I could see this gaining steam. It would be nice if the Christian organizations on campus would get involved. Because this creation message, there's some churches that don't teach it, or they'll take a secular model like evolution and they'll slap a cross on it and teach theistic evolution. That's where we got a big problem in Christianity. Or they'll take a secular model like plate tectonics and they'll speed it up billions of times and call it catastrophic plate tectonics. And that's what you'll see at the Ark or at the the Creation Museum. And so what I'm trying to do is give, if there's two theories, the blind chancers, they teach their theory as dogma. They don't allow another voice in. And as creationists, if there's two theories, we should have a higher standard. We should put them up there, display them both, and then let people think. And I think the most popular display in any museum would be comparing accurate predictions. Compare the hydroplate predictions with the catastrophic plate predictions and the plate tectonics and the evolution. Just to have that. And I think that would be the most popular display in a museum. And it would also, the people going out would have so much more faith in the Creator. Because right now, that my sister-in-law, she the only reason it came up was I was playing a game at the table and this was on the couch, and she was going through it and she said, "This has the answers." And I said, "Yeah, I know." And she goes, I love science." And I said, "You're gonna love this book." And that's when she told me that she was kicked out of Sunday school. But yeah, it's very well sourced. Walt Brown, he got a PhD from MIT. He's a full Army Ranger, military guy. He ran the Benet military lab. Just brilliant. And so when engineers love this theory, geologists hate it. Engineers, they look at the forces and the mechanisms and it all makes sense. But geologists, it goes against what they were taught. And it's a shift in paradigm, and that's difficult. I think Thomas Kuhn's wrote something about scientific revolutions, and there's like 5 stages of it. 1 is you got a paradigm. And then 2 is there's anomalies that go against the paradigm, like those epicenters, And then 3 is it's a crisis. There's too many anomalies. You got to find something else. That's where we're at right now. And then 4 is there's resistance to changing the paradigm because their money and their prestige and everything they've learned is tied up in the old paradigm. And that's why science progresses one funeral at a time sometime. Like J. Harlan Brent, he discovered the scablands out in eastern Washington. I think that's where they are. But he said, and this is 100 years ago, he said, that was formed by a flood. A glacial lake that was held back by a glacier breached, and it carved that canyon. And he got ridiculed and rejected because back then all you can think of is uniformitarianism. Today's processes, that's all you can use. And that went against their paradigm. And then they got satellite images. It's like, man, he was right. And so then he finally got his award when he was 90-some years old. But that's where we're at right now. There's things that are falling apart, and the new way is coming. It's just a matter of who's going to be open-minded enough. And I would encourage St. Cloud State. You really want to get people, you really want to get students? Allow a diversity of the thought in the science class. And so then people can think clearly, and it'll lead us out of the dark ages of consensus science. Because that's where we are right now. It's got to be consensus. You can even hear Neil deGrasse Tyson and Del Bigtree go at it. We got to have consensus. The individual scientist doesn't matter. Oh no, the individual scientist does matter. And we saw what a fiasco that was with COVID. And now we've got the consensus science running our science departments. And we need to get out of that. People need to think about another perspective, intelligent design, if you don't want to go to a creator. scienceuprising.com or .org, you can see 4 or 5 minute videos of these PhD scientists showing how blind chance doesn't work. And yeah, that's where we need to go. We need to give people an opportunity to think, and then I think we can have a scientific revolution. Because right now we're in the dark ages, and this book shows it. If you got a different idea, the high priest of education will get rid of you, and that's not science. And so my thing was, first I want to give people, freedom to think. Have these bracelets, green or blue or red or whatever. That's what this means, freedom to think. And professors would wear that, wouldn't they? And then later on, once that gains hold, then you can have freedom to come out of the closet. You can be free to be a creationist and not get fired. You can free to do a thesis on the hydroplate and not get rejected, what happened to Curtis Hammett. I just interviewed him last week. He was at Liberty University. He wanted to do his master's thesis on the hydroplate theory, but the guy who's in charge over at Liberty, he's a catastrophic plate tectonic expert, and he rejected him. He rejected. And then they'll say, well, there's no published papers on it. Well, yeah, that's because you reject the ones that come through. That's just like evolutionists. They won't allow creationists in their journal. And I think we have to break that down for science to advance. It'd be like if I said, hey, I'll give you all the grant money and all the money in the world and all the time to find this chest of gold. Okay, but you have to stay in Stewart Hall to find it. And I put it outside. You'll never find it. You might trip over it coming in from your parking spot, but you can't look there. And that's what's happening with creation. Everything's pointing to a creator. Everything. But they can't look there. And so there's a lot of billions of dollars that NASA is wasting because they got the wrong perspective of the past. And even evolution, they thought DNA was junk. They didn't want to look for it, but then they found function for it. Now that's really hard on evolution. There's a lot of things that are stacking up against evolution, and they keep trying to sweep them under the rug, like the dinosaur blood. And then but the rug's it's not big enough anymore. And so we need to have the emperor has no clothes moment. And I don't know if you know that story at all. Okay, there was a king, he was very vain, he loved gorgeous clothes, and there was 2 scoundrels that came in and convinced him that they had the most beautiful clothes in the world, but you could only see it if you were intelligent. If you weren't intelligent, you couldn't see it. And he didn't want to appear dumb, so he pretended he could see it, and he commissioned them to make him some clothes. And so then they were pretending to work on the weaving thing, make the clothes with nothing. And he sent his officials to go down to look at it, and they didn't want to appear stupid. So they came back and saying, yeah, it's great. And then he's going around, going through town in his parade, and nobody wants to appear stupid, so they all pretend that he's got beautiful clothes on. And then finally a boy says, the emperor has no clothes. And then everybody realized they've been deceived, except the emperor. He just keeps proudly going on like nothing happened. And that's what's happening with evolution right now. There's all this evidence against evolution, but they just keep going on pretending that it's not there. Or they'll make rescuing devices. You can't have comets for millions of years, so they imagine an Oort cloud. They've never seen it, but it has to be there because we have comets. Our magnetic field is decaying rapidly. It can't be millions of years old, so they imagine a dynamo. And you got spiral galaxies that should have wound up over millions of years, but they haven't, so they imagine dark energy. And then you got the universe, it's expanding at an accelerating rate. They can't explain that. So they imagine dark energy. All these things, dark matter and dark energy is 96% of the universe. If your theory can only explain 4%, it's time for a new theory. And then what's the other one? They found soft tissue in dinosaur bones. And they haven't imagined anything to figure that out, but they're imagining that they will imagine something. And then we don't have millions of years of sediment in the oceans. They imagine subduction. And I was in an email conversation with that CPT expert, and I asked him, hey, can you explain subduction without resorting to a miracle? And 5 emails of him dodging it, he finally referred me to one of his scientific papers at the International Creation Conference, and the page, and then on there he says it starts with God's supernatural intervention. So they can't get subduction to go, and secularists know that too. So there's a lot of stuff and Walt Brown has a whole page on why subduction doesn't work. And so they have all these imagining things to prop up millions of years and billions of years. And and it's going to fall apart. I'm just waiting. I'm just wondering who the boy is that's going to say the emperor has no clothes, and then we can all realize we've been misled, and then a scientific revolution can happen. And Walt Brown, he talks about that. He says a scientific revolution or an intellectual revolution doesn't happen when everybody's promoting the same idea, like schools and Christian organizations and the government. They're all pushing an idea. He says, but when a vast number of people realize they've been misled, then the revolution, scientific revolution, begins. And so my goal is to get as many people as possible to realize we've been misled.
And speaking of that, and we just kind of got to cut this out soon, how can students kind of get involved with your club? What is the best way to get involved?
The best way would be to email, I think it's SCSU Creation Club at Gmail. SCSU Creation Club at Gmail. Let's see, otherwise, they can go into, there's a YouTube channel out there called Solidify Your Faith. They can make comments under there, and I'd see that. We got a Facebook page called that also. Or best thing would be come on Thursday night. Come to the public Thursday night at 6 o'clock at the public library. But this is going to air next week. Mm-hmm. So forget about that.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming down and talking to me. So yeah, it's just a 30-minute interview, and it'll air
That's fine.
Probably on Monday. I'll let you know. Okay. So yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you, Shay, for allowing us to have a microphone. That is what we need. Yeah. Freedom of thought.